sermon about food, I couldn't resist the comment. This is from the 2011 Statement of Conscience from the UUA on ethical eating, food, and environmental justice. Aware of our interdependence, we acknowledge that eating ethically requires us to be mindful of the miracle of life we share with all beings. With gratitude for the food we have received, we strive to choose foods that minimize harm and are protective of the environment, consumers, farmers, and all those involved in food production and distribution. Environmental justice includes the equitable distribution of both environmental burdens and benefits of populations of residents and workers. Marginalized people have often been able to find housing or work only in areas exposed to environmental pollutants, with consequent negative health and quality of life effects. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to address our relationship with food. Our principles call for recognition of and respect for the other. As we search freely and responsibly for truth, meaning, and spiritual wholeness, we will make a variety of individual choices about food. Ethical eating is the application of our principles to our food choices. What and how we eat has broad implications for our planet and society. Our values, principles, and integrity call us to seek compassion, health, and sustainability in the production of food we raise or purchase. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Paisley for helping with the service, and also for all the hard work she does for this fellowship. And I know nobody's more aware than I am of seeing how much hard work it is, and probably, like she said, tend to do a little maybe extra cooking, cleaning up and stuff, so she can again work hard for this service, in the service of the OCUF. So just over 4 years ago, I was asked to lead a youth service about food out in Ripon, and I hijacked the idea and gave a sermon called Science and the Mystery. So last fall they asked me back to talk about the original thing. They asked me to talk about food, and so I did that in the fall, and now I'm back to repeat it here. So the reason I hijacked the plan a few years ago was thinking that I would be preaching to the choir about local food and ethical eating. UUism draws a lot of people that care about the environment in the first place, with our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Our relationship with food we eat is such an intimate tie to the interdependent web of life, and a big part of who we are. Or, as a zinger I learned from John Peck of Family Farm Defenders, if you are what you eat, do you want to be cheap, fast, and easy? As I thought about what words to share, I thought I should talk a little bit about my food history and how I came to be here today. I'm an expert on eating. I've been doing it for 50 years. So I think there's probably some bigger experts, maybe a few people with less expertise, but again, we're all experts on eating. I grew up in a large traditional Catholic family with my mom working at home, and much of her day was involved with getting and serving food for 9 of us. We were a meat and potato buds family. Being a large family, the meat portions were definitely modest by today's standards, and it was kind of funny, I never ate vegetables growing up. I had to eat a bowl of iceberg lettuce, and my parents were sick of fighting about making the kids eat their food, or eat their vegetables, so somehow I think I turned out relatively normal with a very little bit of veggie nutrients. But when I think about back to those days, again, seems a lot simpler than today when it comes to food. Food science then was making life easier by reducing the amount of work that went into cooking, and it was the start of the fossil fuel and pesticide drenched, it's called the Green Revolution, that was reducing global starvation rates and the cost of food, and could really be seen as kind of a gift of God. My early career was in the food business as a 14-year-old dishwasher, and quickly I was promoted to cook at age 15, and always scary when you go to eat at a restaurant, when you start thinking about who's actually cooking your food. Although it might not seem related, my degree is in chemical engineering, and so as I'm cooking, I'm thinking about caramelizing the sugars and the reactions going on in the pan as I'm cooking. So a little different take on cooking, but I think being a chemical engineer, it's made me a pretty good cook as I understand the nutrients and how to follow recipes and how heat transfer works, and it's definitely one of my life's pleasures. After getting my degree, I had my first brush with ethical eating and limiting my meat intake. I got a job at the company making cardiovascular products and was well aware of the link between saturated fats and heart disease. Although the data make a compelling argument for limiting meat consumption for health reasons, I was much more affected when part of my job functions entailed getting fresh parts from a small-scale slaughterhouse and seeing firsthand the killing of an animal as part of the meat-eating process. When I moved to Wisconsin in 2003, I was looking for a career change and had a feeling like I wanted to do something to help the environment. And fortunately, I got a job at Marian University teaching environmental science. It has allowed me to pursue this passion. Sometimes I joke that I don't teach environmental science, I preach environmental science. And wanting to stay low on the hypocrisy scale, I've tried to adapt a low environmental footprint to things like playing acoustic guitar instead of electric guitar. That first semester learning about the environmental impact of industrial meat production was a bit overwhelming. There was deforestation from rangeland, water and air pollution from feedlot operations, release of climate-changing methane from livestock animals, potential dangers of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. The monocultures, or should I say the Monsanto cultures, of feed and of corn and soybeans we were growing. I think you get the idea. So it was after a semester doing that is when I gave up meat. But this is not supposed to be a sermon on vegetarianism. I'm going to get into reasons it is ethical to eat meat in a little bit. But to finish my story, the actual start of my vegetarianism was almost exactly when we were starting this UU fellowship. I taught the environmental science for a semester and started wondering, I wasn't eating a whole lot of meat, but when I gave up completely, it was more of a social justice matter. The New York Times had an article about the high number of undocumented workers in the meatpacking industry and the risks they face in this dangerous job with no safety net should they get hurt. Having been in slaughterhouses and knowing the constant dangers the workers are in, I decided to vote with my dollars and quit supporting the meat industry. Since that time, I've come to realize that there are plenty of ways to get meat raised in an environmentally positive way that doesn't exploit workers. But I kind of feel that then vegetarianism is now ingrained as part of my spiritual practice. I know that this social justice argument could also be applied to those that harvest the produce I eat, and I haven't given up vegetables. But I'll address this later. So teaching environmental science the past 8 years really had a lot of pleasure to get to know about the local food movement, both in kind of national movement sense and getting to know a lot of local people that are farmers producing food for local distribution. What I love about the people I meet is that their life's work is really doing something to address the global problems we look at when we look at environmental impacts of modern agriculture. They always seem to exude a positive energy and a type of energy that makes one feel hopeful for the future. And I can't help but think about Sarah and Paul's and what the journey they're embarking on. If you have a chance, visit Growing Power in Milwaukee. Will Allen is developing urban agriculture methods that he hopes can become a model for bringing local food production into cities to provide both fresh, healthy produce and jobs to a community. The location on Silver Springs Drive is a working research laboratory. When you walk through it, you're amazed at all the different methods being used to grow food. If I remember correctly, their productivity is on the order of 20 times more per acre than a conventional crop farm. If you want to make a day of it, visit Sweetwater Organics. I met Matt Ray, who came up with this title himself, Principal Farmer. He's a middle school teacher, has logged about 3,000 volunteer hours at Sweetwater Organics. They're an aquaponic operation, kind of taking what Will Allen's developed and trying to put it on a larger scale. I met him on a committee this summer to find a sustainable use for some sacred land up in Mount Calvary. The School Sisters of Notre Dame's Mount Carmel Convent. The sisters have been on the land for 160 years and have been growing food organically up there. And they opened up the Sunseed Eco Education Center. But unfortunately, as their numbers have declined, they couldn't keep this facility open. But they are really hoping they can find some sustainable use for it. So that's why they kind of formed this committee to look into what could be done with the land. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. I also went what I call my first stop farmer's market farmer through this committee. His name's Rick Slager. He's the father of one of my students, and I thought she described him as a minister, had been doing missionary work in Africa. When I finally met him, it's like he was definitely not, had the look of the minister. And I found out he was a farmer, but he did have a mission to bring sustainable agricultural techniques to Africa. And that's where he is right now. He calls his farm Produce with a Purpose, and he uses profits to self-fund trips to Africa where he works with farmers during our winter months. I think another name could be, he could call it as Produce with a Passion. He's extremely knowledgeable and has all these very interesting heirloom varieties, and the flavor of his produce is just remarkable. I spent a couple summers doing worker share on a CSA. Does anybody not know what a CSA is? It's community supported agriculture where you buy a share or do a worker share, and then each month as the harvest comes in, you get a box of produce. And it's a great way to eat through the summer. Of course, you eat a lot of vegetables. Working as a worker share, I learned a lot about the science of organic food production. Part of the beauty of getting the local food movement is the ability to get to know your growers, and of course, being a worker share, you really get to do that. You realize that buying from them, you're helping support them, their families, and their dreams. You also support local businesses, and thus more money stays in your community, which benefits everybody living here. So that is a bit of my history and how food fits into it. And I want to transition to spiritual aspects of food and eating. Putting together a church talk about food is at least not difficult with respect to sources. The difficulty really is culling all that is out there. Thought I would start with the Bible and see if Jesus had given us any direction. What I found was in Romans 14, verses 1 to 3. So this, I guess, would have been Paul. Yeah, but anyways. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. The first part of this passage reminds me of the t-shirt you might have seen, vegetarian, Indian name for poor hunter. And, the second part is really a universalist view. God will welcome vegetarian and meat eater alike. Or kind of converting the first UU principle, I like to say, I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all meat eaters. So, as I was looking for a biblical source, I also found some commentary on the internet, kind of along the lines of, well, if Jesus ate something, then of course it was ethical to eat it. So since Jesus ate fish, it was okay to be a carnivore. I kind of like this idea because I can use it as an argument not to eat GMOs because Jesus couldn't have eaten those in his time. Regarding GMOs, California had a ballot initiative that would have required food be labeled as containing GMOs. And when I wrote this sermon in the fall, it was really close to, the polling was indicating it was going to pass. Unfortunately, there was a last-minute shift. I'm sure a lot of advertising by the big food giants, and so it didn't pass. But again, it was very promising. And again, it seems like one of these little steps that, shouldn't we be able to know what our food contains? And I think as far as the organic food movement, GMOs are a detriment. For example, some GMO crops are engineered to produce a pesticide right in the leaf known as Bt. As with antibiotics, organisms can evolve resistance to toxins, and the exposure rate increases, so does the rate of the development of resistance. So unfortunately, the Bt toxin was one of the few natural pesticides available to organic farmers to control things like cabbage moth caterpillars. And they could lose that control if the caterpillars become resistant. Other problems with GMOs would be the patenting of the seed and the unbelievably vast acreage of monoculture that makes one think of the Irish potato famine. As in Peru, where potatoes evolved and many varieties exist, there's much less of a threat of a disease developing and wiping out the entire crop if it has genetic diversity. This is not the case with the GMO, where all the seeds are genetically identical. Now let me move back to the UUA Statement of Conscience on Ethical Eating that was approved in 2011. Again, that was just a short part of it that I read at the beginning. You can find the whole thing on the internet. Writing this was a 2-year process that Open Circle's Eco Food Committee watched with great interest. It was a very difficult document to get passed because it is a topic that affects people in so many ways. And there's a question as to whether or not it would get ratified. Here's an example of one of the paragraphs. Minimally processed plant-based diets are healthier diets. Some of us believe that it is ethical only to eat plants, while others believe it is ethical to eat both plants and animals. So this reminds me of that joke where they talk about what all different faiths believe in, and when you get to the Unitarians, it's Unitarians believe that if God exists, there's at least one of them. So I think that kind of covers every aspect. Continuing on, we do not call here for a single dietary approach. We encourage a knowledgeable choice of food based on understanding the demands of feeding a growing world population, the health effects of particular foods, and the consequences of production, worker treatment, and transportation methods. We commit to applying this knowledge to both personal and public actions, recognize that many of us might embark on a dramatic change in eating choices, and some might pay more for food that is ethically produced. This brings up a dilemma regarding the ability of people to afford to eat ethically. So I referred to earlier, there's a dilemma that I have, many produce workers are also undocumented and work in dangerous occupations. We've been purchasing more and more organically produced food, not necessarily for our own health, since the concentrations of pesticides are relatively low, but more so to protect those that produce our food and limit the high exposures that they are subjected to. We are fortunate to be in a situation to be able to pay up to 50% more for our food, but as the Statement of Conscience states, some of us will not be able to pay more for ethical food. Others of us will. Yet all of us can have a role in improving the ethics of food. We affirm that the fight for environmental and economic justice is inherently a fight against all forms of oppression. As a result, ethical eating requires different ways of thinking about these issues that reflect their interconnected nature. And we understand that this work will require creativity, patience, and resolve. Okay. So I'll return to the subject of meat eating so I can provide a fair and balanced perspective. I really enjoyed an essay contest sponsored by the New York Times last spring. The basis for the contest was the following. Ethically speaking, vegetables get all the glory. In recent years, vegetarians have dominated discussions about the ethics of eating. Some of the more conscientious carnivores have devoted themselves to enhancing the livestock by improving what those animals eat, how they live, and how they are killed. But few have tried to answer the fundamental ethical issue, whether it is right to eat animals in the first place, at least when human survival is not at stake. So here are some excerpts from some of the top 10 answers. What I thought was the most interesting was from Ingrid Newkirk, founder and president of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Okay. Soon I will be able to eat meat again without any qualms, without worrying about my health, cruelty to animals, or environmental degradation. That's because this autumn, 14 years after it was just a gleam in the eye of Dutch scientist Willem van Ellen, the very first laboratory-grown hamburger is to make its debut. Dr. van Ellen, while a prisoner during World War II, had been very badly treated, but what bothered him more was abuse he saw meted out to animals destined for the guard's table. He was determined to find a way to reduce animal suffering, and eventually he, and the scientists he inspired all over the world, succeeded. In vitro meat is real meat, grown from real cow, chicken, pig, and fish cells, all grown in culture without the mess and misery, without pigs frozen in the sides of metal transport trucks in winter, and without intensive water use, massive manure lagoons that leach into streams, or antibiotics that are sprayed onto and ingested by live animals, and which can no longer fight ever stronger drug-resistant bacteria. It comes without E. coli, salmonella, and other health problems that are unavoidable when meat comes from animals who defecate. It comes without the need for excuses. It is ethical meat. So even though I'm a vegetarian, this idea is not appealing. It seems to move us further away from the interconnected web of life. It'll be interesting to see how this develops in the future. If forced to choose, would you rather be a vegetarian or a tissutarian? A more concrete essay came from Stacy Roselle, a farmer from Needville, Texas. I would agree with those vegetarians who say our culture eats too much meat. Too much meat creates its own imbalances if farms are converted into smelly feedlots. I'm often disappointed at restaurants where vegetables seem to be an afterthought, a mere garnish next to the meat. We need to seek balance in our land and in our kitchens. However, I also ask my vegetarian friends to consider that if they're eating eggs, then someone had to cull the rooster or mature hens, and hope those animals were not wasted. If they're drinking dairy, someone had to cull the males from the herd, since a world where every animal is maintained would be unsustainable. And if there are no animal inputs on the farms, then that energy has to come from fossil fuels and other non-organic sources. A farm animal is not a pet or a wild animal fending for itself. The farm animal and the small farmer must cooperate to build a stronger herd or flock. We literally cannot survive without each other. The eating of animals is paramount to the production of food in a system that embraces the whole of reality. This is why eating meat is ethical. To not consume meat means to turn off a whole part of the natural world and to force production of food to move away from regenerative systems and to turn towards a system that creates larger problems for our world. This is a beautifully stated seventh principle type argument. And finally, the last paragraph is from the winning essay by Jay Boast, an agroecologist from Warren Wilson College in North Carolina. And it leads into what I want to leave you with today. For me, eating meat is ethical when one does three things. First, you accept the biological reality that death begets life on this planet, and that all life, including us, is really just solar energy temporarily stored in an impermanent form. Second, you combine this realization with that cherished human trait of compassion and choose ethically raised food, vegetable, grain, or meat. And third, you give thanks. And that's the most important aspect of food, that we appreciate that which provides us sustenance, and for those whose efforts provide it to us. So in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I will close with one of my favorite Peter Mayer songs called Bountiful. And then hope we'll have time for some fellowship response after that. And then I just threw in the song at the very end for closing hymn, Where is the Light? Because that's such a fun song. So. So this is a song that I learned a year and a half ago. I woke up on Thanksgiving morning and just started figuring out the chord progression for the song. And again, it's just it's one of my favorite songs to sing because again, it just makes you appreciate all that we are given. You don't just say grace before you dig in. You stand and sway around the kitchen leaving, sit down and bountiful. And when you are a man with the pans and the cupboards, you lapse into a trance and you dance like a lover till dinner time has slipped your mind and you can't recover, like a drunkard stumbling round and bountiful. And when you fold your hands, you laugh, 'cause words escape you. So when you pray, you shut your mouth and bountiful. The harvest moon is high in late September, and life's in great supply of the sweet and the tender. It's the whole ordeal before the meal that you will remember, if you ever make it down to bountiful. Do not, na na na, do not, na na na, do not, na na na, na na na, do not, na na, do not, na na, do not, na na na, na na na. It's always so much harder to sing up here than it is in the audience.
All right, this is the time for some fellowship response and comment, and I know there's some great knowledge and wisdom in the room as well.
I am so very, very